Smoke still hung in the air, thick and heavy, drifting like a ghost over the broken battlefield. Lyra knelt in the ashes, her chest heaving, her hands clutching at the cold body in her arms. Her partner, Kale, her bonded one, the only soul she trusted in this cruel galaxy, lay still. His alien eyes, once bright with fire, were dim and empty now. Her throat burned, but no sound came. She wanted to scream, to tear the sky apart with her grief, but her voice had died with him. The war had taken many, but this cut deeper than any wound. They had fought side by side since childhood. She had sworn to Kale that no force, no enemy, no human could ever come between them. And yet here she was, kneeling in the ruins, and all she could see were human banners flying above the smoke. She hated them, every one of them. To her, Kale's blood was on their hands. Her people whispered behind her as soldiers came to collect the fallen, but she refused to let go. Her claws dug into Kale's armor, holding him against her chest. A human officer came close, his boots crunching on the glassy soil, his tone too calm for her grief. "We must move," he said, but she did not even look at him. Her eyes burned with rage. She spat at the ground near his feet, her whole body trembling. Later, when Kale's body was taken for the rites, Lyra stood alone. The council gathered her quickly, speaking in sharp voices. They did not give her time to grieve. "You cannot fight alone," one of the elders said. "You will be paired again. We need you on the front." She clenched her fists. "I do not want another," she hissed. "I had one." But their eyes were cold, their orders final. When she heard the name, her blood froze. Ethan, a human. They wanted her to fight beside one of them, the very creatures she blamed for Kale's death. She thought it a cruel joke, some twisted punishment. Her claws scraped the table as she stood. "Never," she whispered. The elder's eyes narrowed. "Then you are useless." The next day, she saw him. Ethan stood tall, his uniform scorched from battles of his own, his face carrying scars that spoke of survival. He offered his hand in greeting. She did not move. She only stared at him, her eyes cold, her body stiff. Her mind screamed with hate, yet she forced herself not to attack. His hand lowered, but his expression did not change. He simply nodded, as if he expected nothing from her. They were sent out together on patrol. The silence between them was heavier than the ruined air they walked through. She walked ahead, refusing to let him near, her claws ready to strike if he so much as brushed against her. He followed at a steady pace, keeping watch, never speaking. To her, his silence felt like arrogance. To him, it was patience. Night fell, and they stopped at the remains of a burned-out village. She sat apart, staring at the flames of a small fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. In the shadows, she thought of Kale, of his laughter, of the warmth of his hand in hers. Then her gaze shifted to the human sitting across the fire, quiet, sharpening a blade. Rage filled her chest again. Kale was gone, and yet they expected her to survive with this stranger at her side. She stood suddenly and hissed. "Do not think you can take his place." Her voice cracked, breaking through the night. Ethan lifted his eyes to her, steady, unreadable. He did not argue, did not defend himself. He only said, "I would never try." His words cut her more than any blade. She turned away, her claws digging into the earth. She wanted to hate him more, to tear his throat out, but his calm tone lingered in her ears. He spoke like someone who understood loss, someone who carried his own ghosts. She hated that thought most of all. Hours later, when the fire had died down, she still sat awake. Memories of Kale circled in her mind like vultures. The war drums in the distance rolled across the hills, a reminder that tomorrow they would march again. She tightened her grip on her weapon, vowing never to let a human touch her heart, never to let her grief soften. Yet, in the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan still awake, his back against a ruined wall, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness for danger. He looked more like a sentinel than a man, guarding her as if his life was bound to hers. She turned away quickly, burying her face against her knees. She would not admit it, not even to herself, but a small part of her heart, the part not yet drowned in grief, wondered why he stayed awake when he could have slept. The night stretched on, heavy with silence. In the ashes of her pain, hatred burned bright, but something else, too small to name, began to flicker in the shadows, and Lyra hated that most of all. The morning light crept over the ruins, casting long shadows across the broken ground. Lyra rose without a word, her face set in stone. Ethan was already awake, adjusting the straps of his gear. He glanced at her once, but said nothing. She preferred it that way. His silence was easier to hate than his voice. They walked side by side, but to her it felt like walking with a ghost she never asked for. Every step she took, she remembered how Kale used to walk just half a pace ahead, glancing back to make sure she was there. Ethan never did that. He stayed behind, giving her space, as if he knew she would rather he disappeared altogether. By midday, the air grew hot, the ground cracked beneath their boots. They reached an outpost destroyed in the last skirmish, its towers fallen, walls broken. The smell of scorched metal lingered. She searched for supplies, claws scraping through rubble. Ethan joined her search, but every time he picked something up, she snatched it away, refusing to let his hands touch what she carried. He didn't protest, just kept looking. Finally, her anger boiled over. "Why are you here?" she snapped, her voice sharp. "Why not leave me alone? You humans destroy everything you touch." Ethan looked up from the shattered ground, his eyes calm. "Because the council ordered it," he said simply, "and because leaving you alone would get you killed." Her chest tightened with rage. "I don't need you." She stepped closer, claws flashing in the dim light. "If danger comes, I fight. I survive. I do not need a human shadow following me." For the first time, Ethan's voice carried steel. "Then prove it when the danger arrives." The words struck her. Not because of the challenge, but because he spoke them without mockery, as if he truly believed she could. She turned away, unwilling to let him see the doubt rising in her chest. When night came again, the wind howled across the plains, sharp and cold. They found shelter in a hollowed cave, its walls blackened with old fire. She sat near the entrance, her weapon across her lap. Ethan settled deeper inside, pulling a thin blanket around his shoulders. The silence stretched, broken only by the whistle of the wind. In the dark, Lyra's mind betrayed her. She remembered Kale's laughter in the night, his hand reaching for hers in the cold. A hollow ache grew heavier in her chest. She clenched her claws tight, trying to drown the memory, but the emptiness only grew. A sudden noise outside the cave snapped her back. She stiffened, weapon ready, her ears catching the faint scrape of movement in the dirt. She glanced at Ethan. He was already awake, rifle raised, eyes sharp. Their gazes met for the first time with something other than hate. She nodded once, unwillingly, and he shifted closer to the entrance. The sound faded after minutes that felt like hours. Probably a scavenger, nothing more. But the way Ethan had moved, ready without hesitation, made her chest twist again. He was alert, prepared, watching her back without being asked. She told herself it meant nothing. He was only doing his duty. Yet as the wind calmed and her eyes grew heavy, she realized something she could not ignore. Even when she hated him, even when she spat venom with every word, Ethan did not leave her. He stayed. He watched. And he waited, as if he knew that hatred was only a shield she carried to hide the wounds beneath. Sleep finally took her, but not before a thought slipped through her grief. If danger truly came, would she still push him away, or would she let him stand at her side? The sun was high when the silence of the plains shattered. A sharp hiss cut the air, followed by the crack of plasma fire. Lyra dropped to the ground, claws scraping dust as shadows moved fast between the ruined stones. Raiders. Their bodies glimmered with jagged armor, eyes glowing with hunger for blood. She sprang forward without waiting, her blade flashing. The first raider lunged, and she met him with a snarl, slicing through his chest. For a moment, fury gave her strength, the old rhythm of war returning to her muscles. But more poured from the hills, too many, too fast. Behind her, Ethan fired steady bursts, his rifle spitting light into the chaos. Each shot found its mark, dropping one enemy after another. Still, the tide pressed closer. Lyra spun, her breath ragged, and saw a raider leap from above, spear aimed at her heart. She had no time to block. Ethan moved before thought. He slammed into her, knocking her aside. The spear ripped across his side instead, a burning streak of red staining his armor. He stumbled, but kept firing, even as pain twisted his face. Lyra froze for half a heartbeat, the sound of his blood hitting the dirt ringing louder than the battle itself. Anger surged through her. Not anger at him, but at the enemy, at the sky, at the war that would not leave her. She roared, her claws tearing into another raider with savage force. Ethan gritted his teeth, covering her with fire as she struck down those who circled too close. Minutes stretched into eternity until at last the last raider fell, choking on the dust. Silence crept back, broken only by Ethan's sharp breaths. He sank to one knee, his rifle slipping from his hand. Lyra turned, her chest heaving, her claws dripping. She stared at him, stunned. You? Her voice cracked. She could not form the words. He looked up at her, his face pale but his eyes steady. You're alive, he said, as if that was all that mattered. She wanted to hate him still, wanted to spit at the ground, but the sight of his blood soaking into the dirt made her stomach twist. Her claws shook as she reached toward him, then stopped, unsure. He was human, the enemy, and yet he had bled for her. He tried to stand, but faltered. Without thinking, she caught him by the arm, steadying him. His weight pressed against her for a moment, heavy and real. Her heart pounded, louder than the drums of war. She pulled her hand back quickly, ashamed of the instinct that made her help him. The battlefield was quiet now, but inside her chest, chaos raged. For the first time since Kale's death, her hatred did not feel as strong as before. Something else pressed through the cracks, something dangerous, something she refused to name. Ethan met her gaze once more, breathing hard, blood still running from his wound. "Stay close," he whispered. And though every part of her wanted to scream in defiance, her feet would not move away from him. Ethan staggered as they left the battlefield, his steps uneven, blood dripping in a slow trail behind him. Lyra walked ahead at first, her claws still trembling from the fight, but the sound of his heavy breathing forced her to stop. She turned back, and for the first time she saw not a soldier, not a human, but a man fighting to stay upright. His face was pale, jaw tight, yet his eyes never left the horizon, as if nothing mattered except moving forward. She clenched her fists, torn between walking on and letting him collapse. But when his knees buckled, her body moved without permission. She rushed to his side, catching his arm before he fell. His weight pressed against her shoulder, hot with fever, and for a moment she hated herself for caring. "Why did you do it?" she hissed. "You should have let me die." He winced but managed a faint smile. "That's not how I'm built." The words unsettled her. They walked together through broken fields, his arm heavy across her shoulders. Each step dragged him closer to the ground, yet he never once asked her to slow down. She could feel the warmth of his blood seeping through her armor, smell the iron sharp in the air. By dusk, they reached the skeleton of an old watchtower. Its walls leaned but still gave some shelter. She lowered him gently against the stones, her claws scraping the dirt in frustration. She had watched comrades die before. She had buried her bonded partner with her own hands. She had sworn not to feel again. And yet watching Ethan fight for breath sent a storm tearing through her chest. She ripped strips from her cloak and pressed them against his wound. He flinched but did not push her away. His eyes fluttered closed, and for an instant she thought he would not open them again. Panic clawed at her throat. "Stay awake, human," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "If you die now, I'll—" She stopped, choking on the words she could not finish. His eyes opened slowly, hazy with exhaustion. "You'll what?" he whispered. She looked away, furious at herself, furious at him, furious at everything. Her claws dug into the stone beside her. "I'll make sure your death wasn't for nothing," she said finally, but the lie tasted bitter. The night grew cold, the wind whistling through the cracks of the ruined tower. Lyra sat close, her body tense, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Yet she stayed within reach of him, listening to his uneven breaths. Each time his chest rose, a strange relief washed over her, one she refused to acknowledge. Hours passed before he stirred again. His voice was weak but steady. "You should rest. I'll keep watch." The words almost made her laugh, sharp and bitter. He could barely sit up, and still he thought of protecting her. She shook her head, refusing to let him see the way her chest tightened. "Fool," she muttered. "You can't even stand." He gave a faint chuckle, then winced at the pain. The sound stayed with her long after he fell silent. She turned her face toward the stars, her heart heavy. She told herself it was only duty, only survival. But deep inside something was changing, and no matter how much she resisted, she could feel the first crack in the walls she had built around her grief. The next morning, the wind carried the smell of smoke from villages far beyond the horizon. Lyra helped Ethan to his feet, her arm firm under his as they moved slowly across the broken plains. Every step felt like a battle for him, yet he never once complained. She wanted to ignore him, to shut him out, but the silence between them was no longer as sharp as before. When they reached a supply camp, healers rushed forward. Alien eyes widened when they saw her supporting a human. She expected mockery, but instead there was only quiet curiosity. She laid him down on a cot, her claws hesitant as she released his arm. The healer inspected the wound and muttered, "Lucky he's alive. Most don't survive a strike like that." The words struck her harder than she expected. Lucky. The human had survived because he had stood between death and her. She paced outside the tent, her chest heavy. Her people walked past, whispering, some with pity, others with disdain. She caught fragments. Kale's partner, now paired with a human. Her claws dug into the wood of a post until it cracked. Later that night, she returned to check on him. Ethan lay half asleep, his armor set aside, the bandages clean against his side. His eyes opened when he heard her steps. "You're still here," he murmured, voice low with fatigue. She folded her arms, staring at him. "I should hate you. I told myself you were to blame." He didn't flinch. "I know." Her voice shook, sharp and cold, but trembling underneath. "But you weren't there when Kale fell. You didn't cause it. I hated you because it was easier than hating the war itself." For a long moment, neither spoke. Ethan's gaze was steady, calm, not proud, not smug, just listening. Finally, he said, "Loss breaks us in ways we don't choose. If hating me kept you standing, then I can carry that." Her throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to strike him, to remind him he was nothing to her. But the words would not come. Instead, she remembered every step of the journey, his silence, his patience, his wound, and his refusal to let her die. The sound of horns in the distance shattered the quiet. Scouts rushed into camp with grim news, raiders massing again, preparing for another strike. Soldiers scrambled to arms, the camp alive with tension. Ethan tried to push himself up, grimacing against the pain. "You can't fight," Lyra snapped, stepping closer. He met her eyes with iron resolve. "If they come, I won't lie here while you bleed alone." The fire in his tone shocked her, not because he was reckless, but because it was the same fire Kale once carried. She felt something stir inside her, a memory and a warning. She could not lose another. Not like this. She turned away, gripping her weapon, her voice hard though her heart trembled. "Then stay behind me. If you fall again, I'll never forgive you." Ethan gave a faint smile despite the pain. "Deal." And in that moment, though the night shook with the sound of war drums, she realized the wall of hate she had built around her heart was no longer unbroken. A crack ran through it now. And through that crack, something dangerous, trust, was beginning to grow. The attack came before dawn when the camp was still half asleep. The first explosion shook the earth, tearing through the outer barricade. Lyra was already on her feet, weapon drawn, her body tense like a coiled spring. Ethan stumbled out of the healer's tent, pale but armed, his wound still fresh. She wanted to order him back inside, but there was no time. Raiders were pouring through the smoke. The night lit up with fire. Plasma bolts cut the air, screams rose, and chaos swallowed the camp. Lyra fought with ferocity, her claws slashing, her blades striking true. Every move was driven by rage, by memory, by the promise she made to never lose another partner. But no matter how hard she struck, the enemy kept coming. A group of raiders broke through the flank, rushing toward her. She braced herself, but suddenly Ethan was there, forcing himself into their path. He fired in short, brutal bursts, dropping two before one caught him across the chest with a jagged blade. He grunted, staggered, but did not fall. "Fool," Lyra screamed, shoving the last raider aside with a roar. She caught Ethan by the arm as he swayed, his blood hot against her hand. He should have been inside, safe, healing. Instead, he was here, bleeding again for her. Another explosion ripped through the camp and the world spun into fire. Lyra pulled him down as debris rained from above, shielding his body with her own. When the dust cleared, she looked at him, his face streaked with blood, eyes blazing even through pain. "You should have run," she hissed, pressing him against the earth. His answer came between ragged breaths. "And leave you? Never." The words cut deeper than any wound. For a heartbeat, she froze, her chest tightening with something she had not felt since Kale. She had sworn never to let her heart open again, but Ethan's defiance, his refusal to abandon her even when death closed in, shattered her resolve. The battle raged on. She fought harder than before, striking down anything that came close, dragging Ethan with her when he could not walk. Every time he faltered, She pulled him back. Every time she thought he would fall, he forced himself to stand. By the time the raiders retreated, the camp was burning, bodies scattered in the dust. Lyra knelt beside Ethan, her claws trembling as she held his face. His eyes flickered, heavy with exhaustion, but still he managed a weak smile. "You live," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Her breath caught. For so long she had believed humans only took, only destroyed. But this one, this scarred, stubborn human, had given everything for her, and though the fire still roared around them, she knew something inside her had changed forever. The camp was silent after the battle, nothing left but smoldering fires and the groans of the wounded. Lyra sat beside Ethan, his head resting against her shoulder, as healers worked quickly around them. His face was pale, his breaths shallow, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, steady even in weakness. She had never seen such stubborn resolve. She remembered Kale's last moments, the weight of his body in her arms, the emptiness that followed. For weeks she had cursed the humans, sworn they were the reason her life was torn apart. But now, staring at Ethan, she realized the truth was far more cruel. War had taken Kale, not Ethan, not this man who had bled again and again to keep her alive. When the healers moved on, Lyra remained, her claws tracing the dirt. She whispered, almost too low to hear, "I hated you because it was easier than grieving him." Ethan's lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile. "Then hate me less," he murmured. Her throat tightened. She should have argued, should have reminded him he was human, an outsider, a replacement forced on her by the council. Instead, she found herself gripping his hand, holding it tight as if letting go would mean losing another partner forever. His fingers curled back around hers, weak but certain. Days later, when the fires were buried and the camp rebuilt, the council called her forward. They asked if she would accept the human as her bonded partner in battle. The hall fell silent as alien eyes waited for her answer. She looked at Ethan, standing beside her, scarred and still recovering, yet unshaken in his stance. Her chest ached, memories of Kale still sharp as knives, but for the first time the pain was not alone. Something else filled the cracks. Trust, loyalty, and the faintest spark of something more dangerous than hate. She met Ethan's eyes, steady and unflinching, and spoke without hesitation. "He is not my replacement," she said. "He is my partner." A murmur rippled through the hall, disbelief and awe mingling in the air. Ethan lowered his head slightly, but his grip on her hand tightened, as if promising he would never let go. That night, as they sat under the stars, Lyra finally allowed herself to breathe without anger. She leaned against him, her voice soft in the dark. "The universe took Kale from me," she whispered, "but maybe it gave me you so I could learn to live again." Ethan said nothing, only pulled her closer, his warmth steady against the chill of night. And for the first time since her loss, Lyra closed her eyes without fear, knowing she was not alone anymore.